They thought he was a musician until they discovered his general's uniform. Michael Reynolds had arrived in the town of Spring Valley 3 months earlier, carrying only a worn-out backpack and a guitar that seemed to have traveled many roads. Every day, promptly at 3 in the afternoon, he would settle on the bench in the town square and play songs that made the elderly stop to listen, some even shedding tears as they recognized melodies from their youth. On that hot March day, when the sun beat down mercilessly and Michael began to sway during his performance, it was Mrs. Robinson who rushed to help him. The 68-year-old widow, who always carried water for the homeless, didn't hesitate to assist the young man who had brought so much joy to her lonely routine. As she opened his backpack to look for identification to take him to the health clinic, her trembling hands found something that made her freeze. A perfectly folded military uniform with golden insignia she immediately recognized as high-ranking. "Good heavens," Mrs. Robinson murmured, glancing around to see if anyone else had noticed. "What is a general doing playing guitar in our square?" Michael opened his eyes slowly, still dazed, and saw the confusion on the face of the woman who had welcomed him so warmly these past months. He realized she was holding his uniform and felt his stomach tighten. The moment he had feared had finally come. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said weakly, trying to sit up from the bench where Mrs. Robinson had helped him lie down. "Son, are you hiding who you are?" she asked, a mix of concern and curiosity in her voice. "This uniform, these medals, are you in the military?" Michael ran a hand through his long, curly hair, a gesture Mrs. Robinson had come to recognize as a sign he was nervous. All these months, she had sensed something different about him. His posture was too upright for someone living on the streets, his manners too refined, and the way he played guitar showed years of formal training. He finally replied, "I was in the military. But that was a long time ago, Mrs. Robinson. Now I'm just Michael, the musician in the square." "General Michael Reynolds," she read from the embroidered name on the uniform. "Reynolds, that name sounds familiar." Michael's heart raced. He knew sooner or later someone would make the connection. The Reynolds name wasn't exactly common among high-ranking officers in Texas, the state where he had served for 15 years before walking away. "Did you know my father?" he asked, resigned. Mrs. Robinson closed her eyes, as if searching through old memories. After a few seconds, she opened them with a look of recognition. "General William Reynolds. Of course I knew him. He commanded the southern region for years, a respected man, full of integrity. But he..." She paused, unsure how to continue. "He passed 2 years ago," Michael finished, "and left a lot behind." The afternoon wore on, and other townspeople began to gather, curious about the commotion. Old Joe, who owned the grocery store across from the square, was the first to approach. At 72, he knew all the town's secrets and had grown fond of the young musician who brightened his afternoons. "What happened here? Did the boy take ill?" Old Joe asked, but his eyes quickly fixed on the uniform Mrs. Robinson still held. "Joe, can you believe our Michael is the son of General Reynolds?" Mrs. Robinson said, unable to keep the discovery to herself. Old Joe adjusted his glasses and examined the uniform more closely. As a former public servant, he knew military insignia well and could tell the difference between a real uniform and a costume. "This uniform is genuine," he confirmed, "and these medals, they're campaign medals for military merit. Son, did you really serve in the armed forces?" Michael stood up fully, realizing there was no point in hiding anymore. The small crowd forming around them grew by the minute, and soon the whole town would know his true identity. "I served for 15 years, he admitted. "I made general by 35, younger than many expected, but I chose to leave it all behind." "But why?" asked Sarah, Mrs. Robinson's daughter, who had come running when she heard her mother was involved in some commotion in the town square. At 45, Sarah was a teacher at the local school and had always been fascinated by complex human stories. Michael looked at the curious faces around him, people who had become his family over these 3 months, who had welcomed him without questions, who respected his choice to live simply. Now they all wanted answers he wasn't sure he was ready to give. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, back to the story. It's a long story, Michael said, carefully tucking the uniform back into his backpack. And not an easy one to tell. We have time, Mrs. Robinson said with her usual kindness, and you don't have to face it alone. Michael felt his eyes well up. For the past 2 years, since leaving the army, he had grown used to solitude. He had chosen to live as a wanderer, playing guitar in small-town squares, precisely to avoid deep connections that might bring his past to light. My father was truly an upright man, he began, looking straight at Mrs. Robinson. At least that's what I thought. I grew up seeing him as an example of honor, discipline, love for country. That's why I followed in his footsteps, enlisted young, studied at the military academy. And what changed? Sarah asked, hearing the pain in Michael's voice. 3 years ago I found out not everything was as it seemed, he replied, his voice beginning to waver. I discovered my father had been involved in corruption schemes. Misuse of funds meant for military infrastructure improvements, inflated contracts, favors for friendly companies. The silence that followed was heavy. Old Joe shook his head in disbelief. That can't be true, son. I met your father personally when he visited our region. He was a righteous man. That's what I thought too, Michael said bitterly, until documents surfaced during an internal investigation. I was being considered for an even higher position, but when I learned what my father had done, I couldn't wear the uniform anymore. Were you punished for what your father did? Mrs. Robinson asked, indignant. No, Michael replied quickly. The investigation cleared me completely. I knew nothing, wasn't involved, but it didn't matter. Every time I looked in the mirror wearing that uniform, I saw his face. I saw the dishonor he brought to our family, to the institution I loved so much. Sarah stepped closer and placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. But you're not responsible for his mistakes. Not in my head, Michael admitted, but in my heart. It was different. I felt like I carried the weight of everything he'd done. The soldiers who suffered from inadequate equipment, the families who endured poor housing, the young recruits who didn't get the training they deserved because the money was misused. And that's why you left everything? Old Joe asked. That's why I ran away, Michael corrected. Because that's exactly what I did. I requested my discharge, grabbed my backpack and left, traveling across the United States playing guitar. I tried to hide from who I was, from the last name I carry, from the responsibility I felt. Mrs. Robinson looked at the backpack where the uniform was stored. But you brought the uniform with you, why? Michael took his time answering. It was a question he asked himself every day. I don't know, he finally admitted. Maybe to remind me of who I was, or maybe to remind me of who I could never be. Just then, old Frank arrived at the town square, the former mailman who, at 80 years old, still walked miles every day. He overheard the end of the conversation and approached curiously. General Reynolds. That name sounds familiar, he said, scratching his head. Son, I knew many military officers in my days as a mailman, including a General Reynolds who received a lot of official mail here in the area. Michael lifted his head, surprised. Here, my father received mail here in Spring Valley. He sure did, old Frank confirmed. For years, I delivered many letters to him myself at the town inn. He came here regularly, at least once a month. That's impossible, Michael said. My father never mentioned this town. I'd never been here before. Well, he did come, old Frank insisted, and he always seemed shaken when he left. Once I even saw him crying on the park bench where you usually play. The revelation left Michael confused. In all the years he'd lived with his father, he'd never heard of Spring Valley. Why would he come here regularly? And why did it upset him so much? Old Frank, Mrs. Robinson said thoughtfully, do you remember when these visits happened? They went on for years, the old man replied, but they stopped about 3 years ago, give or take. Michael did the math quickly. 3 years ago was exactly when he'd uncovered his father's corruption schemes. Could it be a coincidence? Would you know where those letters he received here were addressed to? Sarah asked, sensing a mystery unfolding. Oh, they were always for the inn, old Frank said. But I noticed he never opened them in front of me, always saved them to read somewhere else. Michael felt he was on the verge of an important discovery, but he wasn't sure he wanted to pursue it. For 2 years, he'd tried to distance himself from everything tied to his father and his military past. Now, in the very town where he'd found peace, he was learning his father had mysterious connections here. "Do you think there are still records at the inn?" he asked reluctantly. "Mrs. Thompson has owned the inn for 40 years, old Joe said. "If anyone knows anything, it's her." "Michael," Mrs. Robinson said, sensing his hesitation, "maybe it's important for you to find out why your father came here. It might change your perspective on everything. Or it might confirm he was even worse than I thought," Michael replied bitterly. "Or you might discover there's more to the story than you know," Sarah countered gently. Michael looked around at all these people who had become his family. Simple, hard-working folks who had welcomed him without judgment. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was time to stop running and face the truth, whatever it was. "All right," he said finally. "Let's talk to Mrs. Thompson." The group headed to the inn just 2 blocks from the square. Along the way, Michael felt a mix of anxiety and curiosity. Part of him wanted to keep ignoring the past, but another part knew he couldn't run forever. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, a 65-year-old woman with impeccably styled grey hair, recognized the Reynolds name immediately when they explained the situation. "Of course, I remember General Reynolds," she said, inviting the group to sit in the inn's lobby. "A polite, well-dressed man, but always very somber when he came here." "Do you remember when these visits started?" Michael asked. "Well, let me think." Mrs. Thompson closed her eyes, concentrating. "It began about 20 years ago, more or less. He always stayed in the same room, always asked for complete privacy, and always had mail sent here." 20 years, Michael repeated, surprised. That meant his father had been coming here even before the corruption schemes were uncovered. "Yes, and I can tell these visits were very important to him," Mrs. Thompson continued, "because even when it was raining hard, even when the roads were bad, he always showed up." "Do you know where those letters came from?" Mrs. Robinson asked. "Oh, that I remember, because I always found it curious," Mrs. Thompson replied. "They came from New York, from a law office. Always the same sender, Blackstone Legal Partners." Michael felt his heart race. A law office meant legal matters. What was his father handling in New York that required monthly trips to Spring Valley? "And do you recall when his last visits were?" Sarah asked. "About 3 years ago," Mrs. Thompson confirmed. "I remember well because they were very intense in those final months. He'd stay 2, even 3 days here, always very anxious, making lots of phone calls." "Can I see the room where he stayed?" Michael asked, feeling the need for some physical connection to this mystery. "Of course, dear," Mrs. Thompson said, picking up the keys. "It's room 15 on the 2nd floor. Always the same one." As they climbed the stairs, Michael's legs felt heavy. Each step brought him closer to answers he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. The group followed in silence, respecting his tension. Room 15 was simple but comfortable, with a direct view of the town square. Michael walked to the window and looked down, seeing the exact bench where he used to play guitar. "He'd stand here looking at the square," Michael murmured, "watching people pass by, watching the life of the town." "Michael," Mrs. Robinson said, stepping closer, "you're seeing what your father saw every month for 20 years. It must have meant a lot to him." Michael stayed silent for a few minutes, trying to imagine what had gone through his father's mind in this room. Why choose Spring Valley of all places? Why keep these visits a secret? "Mrs. Thompson," he finally said, "did you ever notice if my father interacted with anyone specific in town during these visits?" "Well, he was very private," she replied. "But in the last few years I noticed he'd always spend time in the square, sitting on the bench where you play. And sometimes I saw him talking to—" She paused, thoughtful. "To who?" Michael pressed. "To a woman who used to feed the pigeons in the square. A white-haired lady, always very elegant. But she stopped coming around a few years ago too." Mrs. Robinson and Sarah exchanged meaningful glances. "Do you remember her name?" Sarah asked. "I'm not certain," Mrs. Thompson said. "But I think it was Mrs. Wilson, Catherine Wilson. She lived in the blue house near the church." "Mrs. Wilson," old Joe exclaimed. "Of course I remember her. A retired teacher, a widow, but she moved to New York about 3 years ago to live with her daughter." Michael felt the pieces of a puzzle coming together, but the full picture still eluded him. "Do you think my father came here to meet this Mrs. Wilson?" he asked. "Could be," Mrs. Robinson said, "but why keep it such a secret?" Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now, continuing. That night, Michael barely managed to sleep. Mrs. Robinson had insisted he stay at her house instead of sleeping in the town square, as he had been doing for the past few months. Lying on the living room sofa, he stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what he had discovered. His father, the man he had once admired and later despised, had kept a secret life for 20 years. Monthly visits to a small town, correspondence with lawyers, meetings with a retired teacher. None of it aligned with the image Michael had of him. The next morning, Sarah appeared at Mrs. Robinson's house with a determined expression. "I got Mrs. Wilson's phone number," she announced. "A former colleague of hers is still in touch." Michael felt his stomach twist. The possibility of getting answers was right there, just a phone call away. "Do you think I should call?" he asked. "I think you need to," Mrs. Robinson replied. "For better or worse, you need to know the truth." With trembling hands, Michael dialed the number Sarah had gotten. After a few rings, an elderly woman's voice answered. "Hello? Mrs. Wilson, my name is Michael Reynolds. I'm General William Reynolds' son." The silence that followed was long and heavy with emotion. "Michael," the voice said, almost a whisper. "Good heavens, I've been waiting for this call for so long. You know me." "I do, dear," she answered, her voice choked. "Your father talked about you often. I know who you are. I know what you did. I know why you left the army." Michael was stunned. How did this woman know his story? "Mrs. Wilson, I need to understand what my father was doing in Spring Valley. Why did he go there every month? Why did he meet with you?" "Michael, this isn't a conversation for the phone," she said. "Are you in Spring Valley now?" "I am." "Then I'll come to you. Today. This conversation should have happened a long time ago." A few hours later, a taxi stopped in front of Mrs. Robinson's house. Mrs. Catherine Wilson stepped out slowly, a 72-year-old woman with impeccably styled white hair and an elegant bearing that confirmed her background as a teacher. Michael was waiting on the porch, and when their eyes met, she began to cry. "You look just like him," she said, stepping closer. "You have the same eyes, the same serious expression when you're worried." "Mrs. Wilson, I need to know the truth about my father." "And you will, dear," she said, wiping her tears. "But brace yourself, because it's a story that will change everything you thought about him." They sat in the living room with Mrs. Robinson and Sarah present to support Michael for what was coming. "Your father and I met 25 years ago," Mrs. Wilson began. "I was a teacher at a school in Chicago, and he had been assigned to oversee a military education program for underprivileged youth." "I remember that program," Michael said. He always spoke of it with pride. "And he had reason to be proud," Mrs. Wilson continued. "Your father saved hundreds of young people from delinquency with that program, but that wasn't all that happened. We fell in love." Michael felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. "You had a relationship?" "We did," she confirmed, "and it was the most intense, most painful love of my life. Your father was married, he had you, he had a brilliant military career, and I was a single teacher who fell for the wrong man." "My parents always seemed happy," Michael said, confused. "They were happy, dear," Mrs. Wilson said. "Your father loved your mother and she loved him. What happened between us was a mistake. A mistake that changed our lives forever." "What does this have to do with his visits to Spring Valley?" Mrs. Wilson took a deep breath before continuing. "Because, Michael, we had a daughter." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael felt as though the world had stopped turning. "A daughter?" he repeated, incredulous. "Emily," said Mrs. Wilson, her voice tender. "She was born in 1999 and raised here in Spring Valley by my sister, who couldn't have children. Her father came every month to watch her grow, to secretly be part of her life. I have a sister." Michael felt like he might faint. "A half-sister," corrected Mrs. Wilson, and she's the most precious thing your father and I ever made together. Why didn't I know? Why didn't he ever tell me? Because he was consumed by guilt, Michael, explained Mrs. Wilson. He loved you and your mother more than anything, but he also loved Emily. He was a man torn apart, tormented by the situation he'd created. Michael stood and began pacing the room, trying to process the revelation. Where is Emily now? She's in New York studying medicine, replied Mrs. Wilson. She always knew who her father was, but she never knew she had a brother. Your father made sure she had the best education possible. The letters from the law firm, Michael murmured. They were about child support and Emily's future, confirmed Mrs. Wilson. Your father set up a trust to fund her education and living expenses. With embezzled money? Michael asked, still thinking of the corruption schemes. No, Michael, said Mrs. Wilson firmly. With his own money. He sold properties, took out loans, sacrificed his personal finances to secure Emily's future. Not a single cent of public funds was ever used for it. Michael stopped pacing and looked directly at Mrs. Wilson. So the misused funds weren't for personal gain? Your father told me everything in his final months, Michael. He was being blackmailed. Blackmailed by whom? By people who found out about Emily, explained Mrs. Wilson. They threatened to expose the scandal, destroy his career, ruin his family. In exchange for their silence, they demanded he facilitate certain contracts, turn a blind eye to irregularities. Michael sank heavily into a chair, finally grasping the full tragedy of his father's life. He was trying to protect all of us, he murmured. Exactly, confirmed Mrs. Wilson. He protected you and your mother by keeping Emily a secret. He protected Emily by providing for her, and he protected everyone by giving in to the blackmail. But it destroyed his career anyway. In the last few years, yes, said Mrs. Wilson. The demands grew larger, riskier. Your father was desperate, searching for a way out that wouldn't hurt anyone. Is that why he stopped coming to Spring Valley 3 years ago? He knew investigators were closing in and thought distancing himself would protect us, explained Mrs. Wilson. But he still sent money for Emily through the lawyers. Michael felt a mix of relief and pain. His father hadn't been the corrupt man he'd imagined, but neither was he the flawless hero Michael had idolized as a child. He was a complex, flawed man who'd made terrible mistakes trying to shield those he loved. Does Emily know I exist? He asked. No, replied Mrs. Wilson. Your father insisted she grow up unaware of you or your mother. He thought it would be easier for everyone. And now? What do I do with this? That's your decision, Michael, said Mrs. Wilson. But I can tell you Emily has always felt a void, not knowing her father's family. And you might find in her the connection you've been searching for. That night, Michael returned to the town square where it all began. He sat on the same bench where he played guitar every day and looked at the inn where his father had spent so many nights, gazing out the window, probably thinking about the same dilemmas that now haunted Michael. Mrs. Robinson approached and sat beside him. How are you feeling? Confused, admitted Michael. For 2 years I carried the anger of having a corrupt father. Now I find out he was complicated. Neither a hero nor a villain, just human. And does that change anything for you? Michael thought for a long moment. It changes everything, he finally said. Because now I understand that running away solves nothing. My father tried to protect everyone by keeping secrets, and that only made things worse. And what will you do? I'm going to meet my sister, Michael decided, and I'll tell her the whole truth. About me, about our father, about you, Sarah, old Joe, about all of you who took me in when I was lost. Will you go back to the army? Michael shook his head. No, that life isn't for me anymore. But I'll stop running from who I am. I'll stop being ashamed of my last name. 3 days later, Michael was at Chicago Airport, ready to board a flight to New York. Mrs. Robinson, Sarah, and old Joe came to say goodbye, but it wasn't a final farewell. Will you come back? asked Mrs. Robinson. Always, Michael promised. Spring Valley is my home now. It's where I found my family. It's where my father found peace, even in the middle of all the turbulence in his life. "And the uniform?" Sarah asked, noticing Michael still carried the backpack with his military belongings. "I'll show it to Emily," he said. "She has the right to know that part of our father's story too." On the plane, Michael thought about what it would be like to meet the sister he'd never known. Mrs. Wilson had called Emily and paved the way, but it would still be a shock for both of them. When he arrived at the apartment in New York where Emily lived, his heart raced. The door opened and he saw a 25-year-old woman with the same dark eyes as his and the same serious expression when focused. "Michael?" she asked shyly. "Emily," he replied, emotional. They embraced, and Michael felt a part of himself that had been broken for years finally fall into place. In the weeks that followed, Michael and Emily spent hours talking, getting to know each other, sharing memories of the father they had in common, but in completely different ways. Emily told him about her childhood in Spring Valley, how she always knew her father was in the army, but never understood why he only appeared once a month. "He was affectionate, but he always seemed sad," she said, "like he carried a heavy burden." "He did," Michael confirmed, "the weight of keeping secrets to protect the people he loved." "Do you hate him for what he did?" Emily asked. "Not anymore," Michael replied. "Now I understand he did the best he could with the circumstances he had. They weren't the best choices, but they were made out of love." Emily showed Michael photos of her childhood in Spring Valley, and he recognized many places that had become special to him too. It was as if fate had conspired to bring him to the town where his sister had grown up. "I want to see Spring Valley," Emily said. "I want to meet the people who took care of you when you were lost." "And I want you to meet them," Michael said, "but I have to warn you, they'll adopt you immediately. That's just how they are." 2 weeks later, Michael and Emily arrived in Spring Valley together. The town square was decorated with little flags because it was time for the summer fair, and Michael smiled when he saw his favorite bench now had a plaque, "Music Bench, in honor of all artists who bring joy to our city." Mrs. Robinson, Sarah, Old Joe, and dozens of other residents were waiting in the town square. When they saw Michael arriving with a young woman, everyone approached curiously. "Everyone," Michael said, pride in his voice. "This is Emily, my sister." The impact of the introduction was immediate. Everyone could see the resemblance between the siblings, and soon Emily was being hugged and questioned by dozens of people eager to learn every detail of her story. "Are you a doctor?" Mrs. Robinson asked, impressed. "I'm in my final year," Emily replied, "and I'm thinking of specializing in rural medicine. Small communities like Spring Valley need dedicated doctors." "Are you thinking of moving here?" Sarah asked hopefully. Emily looked at Michael, who smiled encouragingly. "Yes, I'm considering it," she said. "Michael has told me so much about all of you, about how warmly he was welcomed here. I think it would be the perfect place to start my medical career." That evening, an impromptu celebration took place in the square. Michael played the guitar for the first time in weeks, but now he had Emily by his side singing. She had inherited their father's voice, and together they gave a performance that moved everyone present. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. During the celebration, Emily pulled Michael aside to a quieter corner. "Can I see the uniform?" she asked. Michael fetched his backpack and carefully showed his sister the military uniform that had belonged to their father. Emily touched the medals and insignia with reverence. "He showed me photos of him wearing this," she said. "He always said being in the military was an honor, but also a sacrifice. That's what he tried hardest to teach me," Michael recalled. "That honor and sacrifice go hand in hand." "And do you think he kept his honor despite all his mistakes?" Michael thought for a moment. "I think he tried, and I think in the end, what matters is that he loved us enough to carry that burden alone." "What should we do with the uniform?" "I was thinking," Michael said, "what if we donated it to the town museum with a plaque telling his story, the mistakes and the triumphs as an example that even good people make mistakes, but what defines a person is how they try to make things right." Emily smiled. "Dad would be proud of that decision." The next day, Michael and Emily went to the small Spring Valley Museum, maintained voluntarily by some residents. Mrs. Thompson, the innkeeper, was one of the people in charge of the place. "It would be an honor to have this piece in our museum," she said when they explained their idea, "and this story needs to be told. It shows that heroes and villains don't exist in real life, just people trying to do their best." "Exactly," Michael agreed. "My father wasn't perfect, but he was human, and that's a lesson worth preserving." In the months that followed, many things changed in Spring Valley. Emily decided to move to town permanently after graduating. Michael established a music school, teaching guitar and other instruments to children and adults. Mrs. Robinson became like a grandmother to the siblings, and Sarah helped Michael organize cultural events in the square. Old Joe, who had developed a special fondness for the Reynolds siblings, began sponsoring the music lessons, providing instruments for those who couldn't afford them. "It's good to see the square full of music again," he often said. "Ever since Michael came here, the town has been livelier." A year after Michael arrived in Spring Valley, the town held its first Music and History Festival. The uniform of General Reynolds was on display at the town museum, accompanied by a plaque that told his complete story: the successes, the mistakes, the love for his family, the inner struggle between duty and heart. During the festival, Michael gave a special performance. He wore the uniform he had created for himself, a simple t-shirt with the Spring Valley emblem and jeans. It was his new uniform representing who he had become. "My father spent his whole life trying to balance who he was with who he thought he should be," Michael told the audience. "I spent the last few years running from who I was. But here in Spring Valley, with all of you, I've learned we don't need to be perfect. We just need to be true to ourselves." Emily, who was in the audience wearing her newly received medical coat, stood up and applauded. In just a few days, she would start working at the town's health clinic, fulfilling her dream of becoming a rural doctor. "This festival," Michael continued, "is dedicated to everyone who had the courage to start over, to those who made mistakes and tried to make things right, to those who welcomed strangers as family, and to those who believe everyone deserves a second chance." The musical performance that followed was unlike anything Michael had done before. He played new songs, composed especially to tell the story of Spring Valley, the people he had met and the family he had found. One song was called Park Bench and told the story of a lost young man who found his way by sitting in the same spot every day until kind people decided to sit beside him. Another song, Stored Uniform, recounted the story of a man who carried the weight of his father's mistakes until he learned that each person is only responsible for their own choices. The song that moved the audience the most was Sister I Never Knew, a composition about discovering that family isn't just those you're born with, but also those who choose to stand by you. During the festival, a surprise arrived. Mrs. Wilson appeared, accompanied by a distinguished gentleman in his 70s. "Michael, Emily," she said, her eyes shining, "I'd like you to meet Attorney Richard Blackstone, the lawyer who has handled your affairs all these years." Attorney Blackstone stepped forward with an envelope in his hands. "I have something that belongs to you," he said. "A letter your father asked me to deliver only when you two had met." Michael and Emily opened the envelope together, their hands trembling. The letter was in General Reynolds' familiar handwriting. "My dear children, if you're reading this letter, it means you've finally met. It's what I wanted most, and also what I feared most. Michael, I know you've discovered my mistakes, and I know they hurt you deeply. I want you to know my greatest regret isn't the mistakes I made, but the fact I never had the courage to talk to you about them. Emily, you were the light that guided me through the hardest years of my life. Every visit to Spring Valley reminded me that despite everything, I had done something good, you. Now, the two of you have the chance I never had, to be honest with each other from the start, build a relationship based on truth, not the secrets that tear families apart. Michael, you have your mother's generous heart and the determination I always admired in you. Use those qualities to help others, as you've always wanted. Emily, you have the brilliant mind and the compassion that won me over in your mother. Use those gifts to care for those who need it most. And remember, family isn't just blood. It's who we choose to love and who chooses to love us back. With all my love and all my regrets, Dad. The two siblings wept together, embracing, finally understanding the full complexity of the man who had been their father. Around them, the entire community of Spring Valley watched in respectful silence, sharing in the emotion of the moment. "He was right about one thing," said Emily, drying her tears. "Family is who we choose to love." "And we chose all of you," said Michael, looking at Mrs. Robinson, Sarah, old Joe, and all the other friendly faces around them. The festival continued late into the night, filled with music, dancing, and warmth. For the first time in years, Michael felt complete. He was no longer the young, ambitious general he had once been, nor was he the lost wanderer who had arrived in Spring Valley months ago. He was simply Michael Reynolds, music teacher, Emily's brother, Mrs. Robinson's adopted son, and a friend to the whole community. The next morning, Michael woke early and went to the town square, as he always did. But this time, he didn't just bring his guitar. He also carried a small plaque he had ordered earlier that week. He fixed it to the bench where he usually played, right beside the one already there. The new plaque read, "In memory of General William Reynolds, imperfect father, complete man, example that we all deserve forgiveness and a second chance." Emily appeared a few minutes later, carrying her medical bag on her way to her first day at the health clinic. "Beautiful plaque," she said, sitting beside her brother. "I think he would have liked it," Michael replied. "I'm sure he would." They sat in silence for a while, watching the town wake up. Old Joe opened his grocery store, Mrs. Thompson swept the sidewalk outside the inn, and children rushed past on their way to school. "Michael," Emily said suddenly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you regret leaving the army?" Michael thought carefully before answering. "No," he finally said, "because if I hadn't left, I never would have come here. I never would have met you. Never would have found my real family. Sometimes mistakes lead us exactly where we need to be." "Like Dad," Emily observed. "His mistakes brought us here too." "Exactly," Michael agreed. "And maybe that's what he meant in his letter, that even our mistakes can have purpose if we learn from them." Just then, Mrs. Robinson appeared in the square carrying a tray of coffee and homemade bread. "I thought you might be hungry," she said with the same motherly smile that had won Michael over from day one. "Mrs. Robinson," Michael said, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course, my dear. Why did you help me that first day?" "I was a complete stranger." Mrs. Robinson smiled as she poured the coffee. "Because you reminded me of my own son," she said. "He left 10 years ago, and I always wondered if someone would take care of him if he ever needed help somewhere. When I saw you collapse in the square, I thought, what if that were my boy?" "And now," Emily asked, "are we your adopted children?" "Now you're my real children," Mrs. Robinson replied, kissing both their foreheads. "From the heart, and that's what matters." The following months brought even more positive changes to Spring Valley. Michael's music school grew so much that he had to hire assistants. Emily quickly became the most beloved doctor in the area, known for her dedication and kindness toward her patients. The health clinic, which had once struggled, was renovated with Michael's help. He organized charity events to raise funds. The partnership between the Reynolds siblings proved powerful. Michael brought the community together through music, and Emily cared for everyone's health. Old Joe decided to expand his business and opened a small publishing house to print the songs Michael composed. Songs of Spring Valley became the town's first sheet music book, sold to other communities interested in starting their own music festivals. Sarah, inspired by the example of the Reynolds siblings, decided to write a book about the history of Spring Valley, including the chapter about General Reynolds and his children. The book would be titled Small Stories from a City with a Big Heart. Mrs. Thompson transformed part of the inn into a memorial for local music, where General Reynolds' uniform was the centerpiece, surrounded by donated instruments, photos from the festivals, and testimonies from people who had been touched by Michael's music. A year and a half after his arrival in Spring Valley, Michael received an unexpected letter. It was from the Department of Defense, offering him a special position, Coordinator of Social Reintegration Programs for Former Military Personnel. "It's work you'd do right here," explained Emily after reading the letter with him. "You'd help other former soldiers going through what you went through." "It would be like coming full circle, but in a different way," Michael reflected. "And you'd help people who really need it," added Mrs. Robinson. "Like we helped you." Michael decided to accept the position. His personal experience, combined with the welcoming atmosphere of Spring Valley, would make the town an ideal place to receive former military personnel adjusting to civilian life. The first group arrived 3 months later. 5 former soldiers who had left military service for various reasons: injuries, post-traumatic stress, disillusionment with their careers. Michael welcomed them in the same town square where he had been embraced. "Welcome to Spring Valley," he told the group. "I know you're going through a tough time, questioning choices, trying to figure out who you are now that you're no longer soldiers. I've been there too." "How did you get through it?" asked one of the veterans, a young man around 25 who had lost his leg in service. "I learned we don't get through it alone," Michael replied. "We need a community, people who accept us as we are, not as we were or as we think we should be." The reintegration program became a national model. Former military personnel came from all over the country to spend a few weeks in Spring Valley, participating in music activities, doing community service, talking with psychologists, but most importantly, being embraced by the local community. Emily developed a parallel program of specialized medical care for veterans, focusing especially on mental health. Her compassionate approach and her own family history made her a leading figure in the field. 2 years after discovering the uniform, Michael and Emily decided to organize a special event, the first national meeting of military families. The goal was to bring together families who had gone through similar situations: secrets, separations, reintegration struggles. The event was a success. Hundreds of people traveled to Spring Valley to share their stories, learn from others' experiences, and find support in a community that understood their unique challenges. During the event, Michael and Emily gave a special presentation. He played guitar while she told their story, from the discovery of the uniform to building their new life in Spring Valley. "Our story isn't unique," Emily told the audience. "Many military families face similar struggles. What matters is not facing them alone. And remembering that our profession doesn't define who we are," Michael added. "We're people first, soldiers second, and when we stop being soldiers, we're still people who deserve love, understanding, and a second chance." At the end of the presentation, an elderly woman in the audience stood up. "My son left the army 5 years ago, and since then, he's been lost, without direction," she said, her voice trembling. "Can I bring him here?" "Yes," Michael answered immediately. "And you can come with him. Families heal together." That evening, there was a celebration in the town square. Active soldiers, former military personnel, family members, and local residents came together, proving that differences in background and experience don't prevent the creation of a true community. Michael played until late into the night, but this time he wasn't alone on stage. Several other veterans joined him, each contributing their own music, their own stories. Emily moved among the groups, chatting with families, offering medical support when needed, but mostly offering what she had learned about the importance of acceptance and forgiveness. Mrs. Robinson, now officially recognized as adoptive mother of the city, due to the number of people she had taken in over the years, coordinated the hospitality activities with the efficiency of a general. "She should have been in the army," Michael joked with Emily. "She's got more organizational skills than many commanders I've known." "She's military in other ways," Emily replied. "Military in love, in care, in dedication." 3 years after his arrival in Spring Valley, Michael received an honor he had never imagined. He was named an honorary citizen of the town. The ceremony took place in the town square, on the same bench where he had first played his guitar. "Michael Reynolds came here as a stranger," the mayor said during the ceremony. "But he transformed our town in ways we never imagined. He brought music. He brought his sister, who became our beloved doctor. He brought programs that help hundreds of people, and above all, he showed us that it's possible to start over." Spring Valley has given me more than I could ever repay, Michael responded in his speech. It gave me a family, a purpose, and most of all, it taught me that home isn't just where we're born, but where we choose to grow. Emily, sitting in the front row, stood and applauded along with the whole town. She had also been named an honorary citizen in recognition of her medical and social work. My father always said being in the military was about serving your country, Michael concluded. Now I know there are many ways to serve. We can serve through music, through medicine, through caring for others, through building communities. What matters is serving with your heart. After the ceremony, Michael and Emily walked together to the town museum, where their father's uniform was displayed. Many visitors had left notes near the exhibit, sharing their own stories of overcoming, forgiveness, and new beginnings. "Do you think he'd be proud?" Emily asked. "I think he'd be at peace," Michael replied. "Because we managed to do what he couldn't. Turn mistakes into lessons, secrets into transparency, pain into healing, and loneliness into family," Emily added. That evening they organized a small dinner at Mrs. Robinson's home, just for their chosen family. Mrs. Robinson, Sarah, Old Joe, Mrs. Thompson, and a few other close friends who had become true siblings of the heart. During dinner, Old Joe made a special toast to Michael and Emily, who taught us that family isn't just who you're born with, but who chooses to stay with you, and to all of us, who learned that a town isn't made of houses, but of open hearts. "And to General Reynolds," Mrs. Robinson added, who, without knowing it, gave us the greatest gift, his children. "To Dad," Michael and Emily said together, who taught us that even our mistakes can lead us to the right place if we're willing to learn and start again. 5 years later, Spring Valley had become nationally known as Second Chance City. The Veteran Reintegration Program was a model for other towns. The annual music festival drew visitors from across the country, and the small town had grown in an organized and welcoming way. Michael never played alone in the town square again. Now he had a community orchestra made up of local residents, former military members in the process of reintegration, and young people from the area who were learning music at his school. Emily had specialized in community medicine and was developing her own thesis on the impact of music on psychological trauma recovery, using the work she did alongside Michael as her foundation. General Reynolds' uniform remained in the museum, but it was now accompanied by dozens of other pieces donated by military families who visited the town. The memorial had become a space for healing and reconciliation, where people could leave behind the pains of the past and find hope for the future. One special spring morning, Michael woke up earlier than usual and went to the square. It was the 5th anniversary of his arrival in Spring Valley, and he wanted to spend a few minutes alone in the place where it had all begun. He sat on the memorial bench and picked up his guitar. Softly, he played the first song he had composed in town, the one about finding a home where you least expected it. Gradually, others began to arrive. Emily was the first, bringing coffee for both of them. Then came Mrs. Robinson, Sarah, Old Joe, and slowly, the entire community that had become his family. 5 years, Emily said, sitting beside her brother. 5 years, Michael repeated. It feels like a lifetime and yet just like yesterday. Do you regret anything? Michael looked around, seeing all the people he loved, the town that had become his home, the life he had built from the ruins of his past. No, he said firmly, I don't regret a thing. Not even the mistakes, because they all led me here. What would you say to someone going through what you did 5 years ago? Michael thought for a moment, watching the square fill with life, music, and joy. I'd say there's no mistake too big that can't be overcome with love and community. That family isn't about blood, it's about choice. That starting over isn't admitting failure, it's showing courage. And sometimes, the best in us comes out just when we think we've lost everything. At that moment, a child of about 8 came running up. Uncle Michael, she called. Are you playing today? Yes, Lily, Michael answered, scooping her up. What song do you want to hear? The song about the general who became a daddy, she requested. Michael smiled. It was a song he'd written recently, telling the story of a soldier who learned that being a father was more important than being a general. Only if you sing with me, he bargained. I will, Lily promised excitedly. And so, 5 years after arriving in Spring Valley as a lost and angry man, Michael began another day doing what he loved most, sharing music and joy with the people he had chosen as family. The uniform was stored in the museum. His father's medals shone protected in the memorial, but the true honor Michael had earned was right there, in the square, in the smiles of the people he loved, in the music he created, in the life he had chosen to build. Emily joined her brother and little Lily, and together they sang the song of the general who learned that the highest rank a man could hold was that of father, brother, son, and friend. The whole square joined in the chorus, and the music echoed through the streets of Spring Valley like a hymn of hope and new beginnings. The end. So, what did you think of this story of overcoming and reunion? Do you think Michael made the right choice in leaving his military career to find his true family? Tell us in the comments which part moved you the most, and if you know someone who's also had a fresh start in life. Your opinion means so much to us. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other heartwarming stories like this one.